lonely cowboy hired her to clean his cabin, but what she did next changed everything. Emma tightened the straps of her backpack as she stood at the edge of the long, dusty road. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the mountains, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. She had traveled far from the busy town she had grown up in, leaving behind the noise, the crowded streets, and the endless cycle of odd jobs that never seemed to last. This time she had a different kind of job, one that promised quiet, solitude, and something she could not quite name yet. A fresh start. The cabin had been hard to find. Jack's ad in the local paper had only given a rough location. Remote mountain cabin. Cleaning job, pay guaranteed. Experience helpful, but not necessary. Emma had been skeptical at first, but something about the words remote and cabin called to her. She had always loved the mountains, the way they seemed to hold their secrets close, the way the trees whispered stories if you only listened. Now, as she walked along the narrow path that wound through pine trees and rocky soil, she could see it in the distance. A small wooden structure, weathered by years of wind and sun, sitting quietly against the backdrop of the towering mountains. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, hinting at life inside. Emma felt a flutter of nerves in her chest. She had never worked for a stranger in such isolation before. When she reached the cabin, the door opened almost immediately, as if Jack had been expecting her. He was tall and strong, with broad shoulders and hands that looked as though they had spent a lifetime working with tools, ropes, and horses. His face was sun-weathered, his eyes a piercing shade of blue that seemed to study her carefully from the moment she stepped into the doorway. "Hello," Emma said softly, trying not to sound too nervous. "I'm Emma. I'm here about the cleaning job." Jack gave a small nod. "Jack," he said. His voice was low, calm, and a little rough, like gravel mixed with honey. "Come in." The cabin smelled of wood smoke and dust, of old books and pine, a scent that was surprisingly comforting. Emma took a moment to look around. The living space was small but functional. A wooden table stood near the window, scarred with years of use. Chairs with faded cushions were tucked neatly under it. A small bookshelf leaned against the wall, filled with worn novels, magazines, and a few framed photographs. The floorboards creaked slightly under her feet, and cobwebs hung in corners where sunlight barely touched. Jack watched her quietly as she took it all in. "It's been a while since anyone's cleaned properly," he said, almost as an afterthought. "So, you start whenever you want." Emma smiled politely. "Thank you." Inside, she felt a spark of excitement. This was more than just cleaning a cabin. It felt like stepping into a story, a place that had history and life, even if that life was quiet and hidden. As she unpacked her supplies, she noticed the little details that told her more about Jack without a word being spoken. There were photographs on the walls, one of a young girl holding a puppy, another of a woman smiling beside a horse. A faded letter pinned to the corkboard had handwriting that spoke of memories and longing. A pair of worn boots sat near the door, sturdy and practical. Emma realized that this man had lived fully, deeply, but alone. She felt a pang of curiosity and something warmer, a desire to make this space shine again. Jack stepped back to let her work, his expression unreadable. "The kitchen's that way. Bathroom's over there. The rest is up to you," he said, gesturing with a hand that was both commanding and weary. "I don't mind if it takes a while." Emma nodded and got to work. She started with the kitchen, scrubbing counters, washing dishes, and organizing the small cupboards. The rhythm of the work settled her nerves. She hummed softly to herself, the sound bouncing off the wooden walls, filling the cabin with a lightness that had not been there for a long time. Jack occasionally drifted in, carrying firewood or checking on tools, but mostly he gave her space. Emma noticed that he seemed tense at times, like he was unused to having another person in his space. Yet there were moments when he would glance at her with a softness in his eyes, almost like he was seeing the cabin, and maybe even himself, through fresh eyes. By the time the sun dipped fully behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Emma had cleaned the kitchen and part of the living area. She paused to look out the window. The mountains glowed in the last light of day, the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. She felt a sense of accomplishment and a strange kind of peace. Jack appeared beside her, leaning against the doorframe. "You work fast," he said. It was a simple observation, but it carried a weight of approval she didn't expect. "Thank you," Emma replied, smiling. "I like to see results." He nodded, looking away for a moment before returning his gaze to her. "I've lived here alone for a long time. It's different having someone else around." Emma chose her words carefully. Change can be good," she said softly. "Even if it's small at first, you'll see." Jack didn't answer immediately, but she could tell he was thinking. There was a quiet tension between them, a careful dance of words and silences. Neither wanted to overstep, yet both sensed a curiosity about the other. That evening, as Emma finished setting the cabin straight, Jack brought in 2 mugs of hot tea. They sat by the window in silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one. The night was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant howl of a coyote. Emma sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "You don't talk much," she said gently. Jack shrugged. "Not much to say." Emma smiled. "Sometimes that's enough," she said, realizing that in this quiet, even silence could speak volumes. As the night deepened, Emma felt a mix of emotions: nervousness, excitement, and an odd sense of hope. She had arrived expecting a simple cleaning job, but she could feel that there was more to this place, more to Jack, than what met the eye. She lay down that night on the small bed in the corner of the cabin, listening to the wind against the trees, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. In that quiet mountain cabin, 2 lives, so different yet so lonely, had crossed paths. Emma didn't know the story behind Jack's solitude, and he didn't know much about hers. But as she drifted to sleep, she felt a strange certainty that this meeting was the start of something unexpected, something that could change everything. And for the first time in a long while, both felt the faint stirrings of connection, like a whisper of warmth in a cold, empty place. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the cabin, casting golden streaks across the wooden floor. Emma stretched, feeling the chill of the mountain air in the small bedroom. She could hear Jack moving around outside, the soft sound of his boots on the porch, and the occasional clatter of tools. The cabin already felt alive with activity, a small rhythm she hadn't expected to enjoy so quickly. Emma dressed quickly and stepped into the kitchen. Jack was standing by the window, staring out at the pine forest beyond. His broad shoulders were slightly hunched, and she could see the lines of worry etched into his face. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if she should interrupt his thoughts. "Good morning," she said softly. Jack turned and gave a small nod. "Morning. Coffee?" "Yes, please," Emma replied, smiling. She watched as he carefully measured the grounds and poured water over them, a methodical precision in his movements that spoke of years of habit. There was something soothing in the way he worked, something that made her feel less like a stranger and more like part of this quiet world he had built around himself. They ate a simple breakfast in near silence. Emma noticed that Jack was slow to speak, but when he did, his words carried weight. He asked about her trip, about where she had grown up, and about her experience with work. She answered honestly, telling him about the small jobs she had done, the long hours, and the desire to find something that mattered, even if it was just for a little while. "You don't seem like someone who gives up easily," Jack said after a pause. "Most people who come out here expect something easy. They don't last." Emma shrugged, a hint of a smile on her lips. "I don't mind hard work. I like seeing results." He studied her for a moment, his blue eyes unreadable. "We'll see how long that lasts," he said finally, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. After breakfast, Emma started on the main living area, dusting shelves and cleaning the floorboards. Jack watched from the doorway, occasionally offering advice about where to find certain cleaning supplies or how to handle stubborn spots. His instructions were simple, sometimes blunt, but she appreciated them. There was a rhythm to the work, a flow that made the hours pass quickly. As she cleaned, Emma discovered small details that told more about Jack's life. On the bookshelf, she found a journal, the pages filled with neat, careful handwriting. She paused for a moment, curious, but decided it was not her place to read. Nearby, a photograph caught her eye, a younger Jack with a group of friends, smiling broadly, a stark contrast to the reserved man she had met yesterday. There was also a picture of a horse, standing tall and proud, its mane flowing in the wind. It was clear that animals and the outdoors had been an important part of his life for a long time. Jack came over carrying a stack of firewood. "You found the pictures," he said quietly, noticing her glance. Emma looked up and smiled. "I couldn't help but notice. You've lived a full life here." Jack nodded, setting the wood by the fireplace. "Full, yes. Busy, no. Quiet, definitely." His eyes softened slightly. "I like it that way." Emma sensed that there was more behind his words, a story of loss or disappointment that he was not ready to share. She decided not to press, focusing instead on making the cabin feel a little brighter, a little warmer. By late afternoon, the living room was clean and orderly. Emma had moved furniture to open up space, polished the wooden surfaces, and even arranged a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked outside. The effect was subtle, but the cabin seemed less like a place of solitude and more like a home. Jack looked around, his expression difficult to read. "Looks better," he said finally. Emma smiled. Thank you. I just wanted it to feel more comfortable." He nodded, and for a moment, they simply stood there in companionable silence, listening to the soft creak of the cabin settling and the distant sound of a creek flowing through the forest. Later, Jack suggested they check the fence outside. Some of the posts were leaning, and the wire was sagging in places. Emma followed him, carrying tools and supplies. She had never repaired a fence before, but Jack showed her the basics, guiding her hands as she hammered posts into place and tightened wires. At first, Emma struggled. Her hands were sore, and the nails slipped more than once. Jack was patient, offering encouragement rather than criticism. "Take your time. It's not a race," he said. Slowly, she got the hang of it. By the time the sun began to dip behind the mountains, the fence stood sturdy and straight. Emma wiped sweat from her brow and stepped back to admire their work. Jack gave a rare smile, a little lighter than usual, and nodded in approval. "You did well," he said simply. Emma felt a warm glow of pride. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without your help." They walked back to the cabin together, their steps quiet on the soft earth. Emma noticed that Jack was no longer as distant as he had been in the morning. There was a subtle change in his demeanor, a willingness to share the work and the space, to let her be part of his life, even if only for a moment. That evening after dinner, Emma decided to light a few candles around the cabin. The soft glow transformed the space, casting gentle shadows on the walls and making the room feel cozy and inviting. Jack watched her quietly, leaning against the doorframe, his hands tucked into his pockets. "You've done a lot today," he said after a while. Emma smiled. "I like being productive. It makes me feel alive, I guess." Jack nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I forgot what it was like to feel alive," he admitted quietly. Emma looked at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "Maybe it's not too late to feel that again," she said softly. He didn't respond immediately, but she could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. There was something fragile and unspoken between them, a tentative connection that neither wanted to rush, but both felt deeply. As the night grew darker, Emma settled near the fireplace with a book, while Jack tended to the fire. The cabin was warm and quiet, a kind of silence that didn't feel empty but full of potential. They spoke occasionally, sharing small details about their lives, laughing softly at minor stories and listening when the other spoke without interruption. Emma realized that Jack's solitude wasn't just about being alone. It was about guarding himself from the world, from pain, from loss. And yet, her presence, simple and sincere, was beginning to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. Before going to bed, Emma stepped outside for a moment, taking in the clear night sky. The stars were bright and countless, and the air smelled of pine and earth. She felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness, knowing that tomorrow would bring more work, more conversation, and perhaps more connection. Jack appeared behind her, silently standing a few feet away. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, his voice low. Emma nodded. "It is." "I never get tired of looking at the mountains at night. They make everything seem possible." He was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Possible," he repeated, almost to himself. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly. Emma lay in bed, listening to the night and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. She thought about Jack, about the cabin, and about the quiet, steady way their lives had begun to intersect. She felt a sense of anticipation, not for something dramatic or sudden, but for the slow unfolding of trust, understanding, and perhaps friendship. And somewhere deep inside, she sensed that the story between them was just beginning. A story of change, connection, and the unexpected warmth that could grow between two people who had once lived in solitude. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the mountains, casting a soft, golden light across the cabin and the surrounding forest. Emma woke early, as was her habit, and quietly prepared breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast soon drifted through the cabin, mingling with the fresh scent of pine that always seemed to linger in the air. She arranged the simple meal on the table and waited for Jack, who was already outside tending to the horses. Jack emerged from the stable, wiping his hands on a cloth. His face was calm but serious, and he gave her a brief nod. "Morning," he said. "Smells good." "Good morning," Emma replied with a smile. "I thought we could eat before starting outside work today." He hesitated for a moment, then sat down. They ate together in near silence, broken only by the occasional sound of a bird calling in the trees or the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Emma noticed the careful way Jack handled his utensils, the way he seemed to observe everything around him even while eating. She could tell that he had lived alone for so long that even the simplest routines had become rituals. After breakfast, Jack suggested they work on the barn. Some of the boards were loose and the roof needed minor repairs before the rainy season began. Emma followed him outside, carrying tools and a toolbox she had found in the cabin. She had never done this kind of work before, but Jack's quiet guidance gave her confidence. "Hold it steady," he instructed as she hammered a nail into a plank. "Not too hard, just enough to keep it in place." Emma nodded, concentrating on her task. Her hands were a little sore, but she felt a sense of pride as each nail went into place. Jack worked beside her, his movements skilled and deliberate, his experience obvious. Every now and then he offered small tips or corrections, but always in a calm, patient manner. As they worked, Emma began to notice something new about Jack. Despite his gruff exterior, he had a gentle way of observing her, a kind of quiet encouragement that made her feel welcome. He didn't speak much, but his presence was steady and reassuring. She began to realize that this was not just a job for her. It was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and perhaps to understand someone else in a way she had never experienced before. By midday, the barn was in much better condition. Emma stepped back and admired their work. The boards were secure, the roof looked solid, and the structure seemed to radiate a sense of care that had been missing before. Jack, for the first time that morning, allowed himself a small smile. "You did well," he said, his voice quiet but genuine. "Thank you," Emma replied, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction. "I couldn't have done it without your help." They walked back to the cabin together, carrying the last of the tools. Emma noticed that Jack seemed more relaxed, his shoulders less tense, his movements less guarded. The morning had been hard work, but it had also created a bridge between them, a shared sense of accomplishment that neither of them could ignore. After lunch, Emma decided to tidy up the living area further. She moved furniture slightly, dusted corners that had been neglected for years, and rearranged a few items on the shelves. She even hung a new curtain in the window, one that she had found in the cabin's storage, adding a soft touch of color to the room. Jack watched quietly from his chair, sipping water. "You've changed the place already," he remarked. Emma smiled. "I just wanted to feel alive, like someone really lives here." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose it hasn't felt that way in a long time." There was a pause, a quiet space between them filled with unspoken words. Emma felt a connection growing, subtle but undeniable. She could see it in the way Jack observed her, the way he sometimes lingered in a room just to watch her work, as if her presence alone was changing the cabin, and maybe even him. Later, Jack needed to check the fence again. Some of the posts had shifted overnight, and he asked Emma to help him readjust them. They worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing against each other as they passed tools or held boards steady. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a small, unexpected thrill through Emma. "You've got a good touch with tools," Jack said, nodding at her. Emma laughed softly. "I'm learning from the best." He didn't respond with words, but the faint smile on his face was enough. They continued their work in companionable silence, punctuated by the occasional word of instruction or encouragement. Emma realized that these moments, simple and quiet, were starting to feel like the heartbeat of the cabin, a rhythm that had been missing for years. As the afternoon sun began to dip behind the mountains, Jack suggested they take a break. He brought out 2 mugs of coffee and they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and purple. The forest around them was alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the distant flow of the creek. "You seem different than most people," Jack said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Emma tilted her head, curious. "Different how? You notice things?" he replied. "You pay attention. Most people just come and go, do the job." and leave. You see the place. You see me. Emma felt her heart warm at his words. I think everyone deserves to be seen, she said softly. Even people who live alone in the mountains. Jack didn't respond immediately, but she could see a flicker of something in his eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe a hint of vulnerability he rarely let anyone witness. After a while, they returned to the cabin to prepare dinner. Emma cooked a simple meal while Jack chopped firewood for the stove. The routine was comforting, a blend of work and companionship that felt natural. They shared stories of their past, though carefully, avoiding the painful details. Jack spoke of the mountains, of the work he had done over the years, and of the small joys he found in solitude. Emma shared tales of her life in the town, the jobs she had taken, and the lessons she had learned. By the time dinner was over, the cabin felt warm and alive, filled with the quiet energy of shared effort and growing trust. Jack looked around, a rare softness in his expression. I didn't expect this, he said. Expect what? Emma asked, curious. This? All of it? The work, the company. It feels right, he admitted. Emma smiled, feeling a connection deepen between them. She realized that her presence had started to break through the walls Jack had built around himself, and in return his quiet acceptance, his trust, and his willingness to share even the smallest parts of his life were beginning to touch her in ways she hadn't anticipated. As night fell, they settled by the fire, the cabin glowing with a gentle light. They spoke quietly, their words punctuated by the crackling of the flames. Emma noticed that Jack was more open now, his guards lowered just enough for them to connect. Before bed, Emma stepped outside for a moment to look at the stars. The sky was clear and the constellations shone brilliantly above the mountains. She felt a sense of calm, a deep satisfaction that came from work well done and from connection, forming slowly but surely. Jack joined her quietly, standing a few feet away. You've changed things here, he said softly. Emma nodded. I think we've both changed, in our own ways. He was silent for a moment, then added, I didn't think I could feel lighter, happier. But today felt different. Emma smiled, a warm, genuine smile. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to help and someone willing to let help in, she said. Jack looked at her, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. There was a depth there, a quiet acknowledgement of something more than just friendship beginning to take root. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she thought about the day, the work, the small victories, the moments of laughter and understanding. She realized that their connection was growing, slowly, quietly, and with a strength that felt real. The cabin, once a symbol of solitude, was beginning to feel like a home, and Jack, once reserved and distant, was starting to let her presence into his carefully guarded life. Somewhere in the mountains, in the stillness of the night, two lives continued to intertwine. Each small act of kindness, each shared moment, was laying the foundation for something new: trust, understanding, and perhaps the beginnings of a bond that neither of them had expected, but both were beginning to welcome. The day had shown them both that even in quiet places, even in lives shaped by solitude, change was possible. And sometimes all it took was the courage to show up, to help, and to care. The next morning the mountains were wrapped in a soft golden light. Emma woke to the quiet sound of birds chirping outside her window. She stretched and took a deep breath, savoring the fresh, crisp air that always seemed to fill the cabin. There was something comforting about waking up here, in a place where the world felt slower and more thoughtful. Downstairs, Jack was already up, tending to the fire. He looked over when she entered the kitchen. "Morning," he said quietly, his voice low but calm. "Morning," Emma replied, smiling. She set about preparing breakfast, the smell of frying eggs and fresh bread filling the cabin. Jack watched her in silence, the soft glow of the fire reflecting in his eyes. There was a subtle tension in him, something Emma had noticed over the past few days, a quiet weight he carried that seemed to settle over him like a shadow. After breakfast, Jack suggested they take a walk through the nearby woods. The morning was cool and the forest was alive with the sounds of nature. Birds sang in the branches and the wind whispered through the pine trees. Emma felt a thrill of excitement at the thought of exploring the area, and Jack, for the first time, seemed to welcome her company without reservation. They walked slowly, side by side, with no particular destination. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the natural sounds of the forest. Emma noticed the way Jack moved, careful, deliberate, yet confident. It was clear he knew these woods intimately. Every path, every tree, every hidden stream. After a while, Jack stopped near a small clearing. He leaned against a tree, his hands resting on his knees, and looked down at the ground. Emma hesitated, unsure if she should speak. She sensed that something was weighing on him, something he had not shared yet. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice quiet and measured. "I haven't had someone walk with me here in a long time." Emma nodded softly. "Sometimes it helps to have company, even if it's just to share the silence." He looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of vulnerability there, a part of him that rarely showed itself. "It's not just that," he admitted. I've been alone for a long time. And not just alone, but careful about letting anyone in. People can hurt you. Life can hurt you." Emma took a step closer, her voice gentle. "I know. I felt that too. But not everyone will hurt you. Sometimes letting someone in can change everything." Jack was silent for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Then he sighed, a slow, almost painful release of tension. "I lost someone," he said finally. "A long time ago. I thought I'd never, I don't know, recover. I built this life to keep myself safe, to avoid the pain. But—" His voice trailed off and he shook his head slightly. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you." Emma felt a rush of warmth in her chest. She reached out and gently touched his arm. "I'm here now," she said softly. "And I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to be afraid." Jack looked at her hand on his arm, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. For the first time, Emma saw him truly let down his guard. He didn't speak, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly, and the shadow over his eyes seemed lighter. They continued walking, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a new sense of trust, a quiet understanding that had begun to grow between them. Emma listened as Jack spoke more about his past, not the painful details, but the memories of happier times, of friends, and of the simple joys he had once known. She shared her own stories, too, of the struggles she had faced and the moments that had shaped her life. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the clearing. Emma suggested they work on the garden area near the cabin. It had been neglected for years, overgrown with weeds and brambles. Jack agreed, and together they began clearing the space, pulling weeds, trimming bushes, and preparing the soil for planting. The work was hard but satisfying. Emma laughed when a stubborn root refused to come loose, and Jack smiled faintly at her persistence. They worked side by side, sharing the labor and the small moments of humor that made the day pass quickly. As the afternoon sun moved across the sky, the garden began to take shape, a small, neat space that reflected the effort and care they had put into it. After the garden was cleared, Emma suggested planting some flowers. Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the idea. "Flowers?" he asked. "Yes," Emma said, smiling. "They'll make the cabin feel more alive." "Ah, more welcoming." Jack hesitated, then nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's do it." They dug small holes together, carefully placing each plant into the soil. Emma explained how to space them and how to water them properly. Jack listened attentively, occasionally offering his own suggestions. By the end of the afternoon, the garden was filled with new life. Colorful blooms and fresh greenery that seemed to brighten the entire cabin area. Jack stood back and looked at their work. For the first time, Emma saw a real smile on his face, a smile that reached his eyes and warmed the corners of his mouth. "I didn't think I'd enjoy this," he admitted. "But it's nice, really nice." Emma felt a surge of happiness. "See? Sometimes change isn't so bad." The evening came quietly. They prepared dinner together, sharing small jokes and stories as they worked. The cabin felt alive with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the quiet solitude it had held before Emma arrived. Jack seemed lighter, more at ease, as if the walls he had built around himself were beginning to crumble. After dinner, they settled by the fire. Jack took a deep breath and finally spoke more openly. "I've been carrying a lot of regret," he said, "about the past, about the people I've lost. I thought I had to face it alone. But today I realized that maybe I don't have to." Emma reached out and placed her hand on his. You don't. You don't have to do anything alone anymore. I'm here, and I'll help you carry the weight." Jack looked at her hand, then into her eyes. There was a depth of emotion there, a vulnerability that he rarely allowed anyone to see. "Thank you," he said softly. I didn't know I needed this, but I do. I need it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crackling fire and the distant sounds of the forest. Emma felt a deep sense of connection, a bond that had grown stronger through shared work, shared stories, and the quiet moments of understanding. She realized that Jack was beginning to trust her, and that trust was a precious gift, one she intended to honor. As the night grew darker, Emma stepped outside to look at the stars. The sky was clear and filled with countless points of light, each one shining brightly against the deep blue of the heavens. She felt a sense of calm, a deep satisfaction that came from seeing Jack open up and from knowing that their connection was growing stronger. Jack joined her, standing quietly beside her. "You've changed more than just the cabin," he said softly. "You've changed me." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "Maybe we've changed each other," she said, "in ways we didn't expect." Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars. There was a quiet understanding between them, a sense that their lives had been intertwined for a reason. Emma realized that the bond they were forming was not just about companionship or work. It was about trust, healing, and the possibility of something lasting. Before heading to bed, they stood together in the soft glow of the moonlight, listening to the gentle sounds of the forest. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Emma felt a sense of peace, knowing that Jack was beginning to let her into his life, just as she was letting him into hers. As she lay in bed that night, Emma thought about the day, the work, the shared stories, the moments of laughter, and the growing trust between them. She realized that their connection had deepened, that the walls Jack had built around himself were slowly coming down, and that a bond of understanding, respect, and perhaps something more was taking root. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now held warmth, laughter, and life. And in the quiet mountains, two people who had once lived in isolation were discovering the power of trust, connection, and the gentle, transformative effect of simply being there for one another. The morning sunlight broke gently over the mountains, illuminating the cabin in warm gold. Emma woke to the familiar scent of pine and the soft sound of birds greeting the day. She stretched, feeling the comfort of the cabin and the quiet rhythm of life that had begun to settle around her. For the first time in months, she felt completely at ease, like she belonged here, in this space, and perhaps even in this small, quiet world that she had helped transform. Downstairs, Jack was already up, tending to the fire. The glow from the flames lit his face, making him look both strong and thoughtful. He glanced at her as she entered the kitchen and gave a small nod. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied with a smile, carrying a basket of fresh bread she had baked. She set it on the table and started preparing breakfast. The cabin smelled of warmth and life, a sharp contrast to the quiet solitude it had held before she arrived. Jack watched her work quietly, as if observing not just her movements, but the energy she brought with her. After breakfast, Jack suggested they check on the horses. One of the fences on the far side of the property had loosened overnight, and he wanted to make sure the animals were safe. Emma agreed eagerly, grabbing the toolbox and following him outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, and the mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, their peaks glowing in the early sun. As they approached the fence, Jack handed Emma a hammer and a few nails. "Let's fix this before it gets worse," he said. Emma nodded and got to work. They moved side by side, hammering and securing the boards together. Occasionally, their hands brushed against each other, and a quiet warmth spread through her. Jack seemed aware of it too, but neither mentioned it. There was a natural comfort in the silence, a shared understanding that words weren't always necessary. Once the fence was secure, they turned their attention to the horses. Jack handed Emma a brush, and together they groomed the animals, running their hands over the sleek coats and soft manes. Emma laughed softly as one of the horses nuzzled her shoulder, and Jack's rare, gentle smile appeared. For a moment they were simply two people enjoying the world around them, connected not by words but by shared effort and simple, quiet joy. Afterward, they walked back to the cabin, carrying some hay for the animals. Emma noticed that Jack seemed lighter, more relaxed, his usual guarded expression softened by the morning's work and shared moments. Back inside, Emma suggested they organize the cabin's storage room. It had been neglected for years, filled with old tools, boxes, and forgotten supplies. Jack hesitated, unsure if he wanted to dig into the clutter, but Emma's enthusiasm was contagious. "It'll make everything easier," she said, "and it'll feel like home." Together, they sorted through the items, cleaning, discarding, and organizing. Emma found some old photographs tucked in a box, showing a younger Jack with friends, smiling in ways he rarely did now. She noticed a photo of a woman with a gentle expression holding a child. Emma realized this must be someone important from his past. She didn't ask about it immediately, sensing that he would share when he was ready. Jack carried boxes carefully, watching Emma as she arranged the shelves. "You really know how to make a place feel alive," he said quietly. Emma looked up and smiled. "I just like seeing people and places cared for. It makes a difference." There was a pause, a soft moment where neither spoke, just the quiet hum of life in the cabin. Jack seemed to gather his thoughts, then finally said, "I've been so used to being alone that I forgot how good it can feel to have someone else around, to share the day, the work, even the quiet moments." Emma placed a hand gently on his arm. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," she said softly. "You never have to." Jack looked at her hand, then into her eyes. There was a depth in his gaze that spoke of trust, gratitude, and a quiet affection that he had been holding back. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize how much I needed this until now." The rest of the afternoon was spent finishing the organization and cleaning inside the cabin. By the time the sun began its descent, the space was transformed. Boxes neatly stacked, shelves orderly, and the cabin filled with warmth, light, and life. Emma stepped back, admiring their work. Jack stood beside her, silent, and for a moment they simply looked around, taking in the change they had created together. As evening approached, Jack suggested they sit outside and watch the sunset. Emma agreed, and they walked to the small clearing near the cabin. The sky was ablaze with color, reds, oranges, and purples blending together as the sun slowly sank behind the mountains. They sat in companionable silence, shoulders almost touching. Emma felt a gentle thrill as she glanced at Jack, noticing the ease in his expression, the softness in his eyes. He was no longer the distant, reserved man she had met weeks ago. He had opened himself piece by piece, allowing trust and warmth to enter his life. Jack finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "You've changed everything here," he said. "The cabin, bound, a land, even me." Emma smiled, her heart swelling. "Sometimes change just needs a little push," she replied, "and a little company." Jack looked at her then, truly looked at her, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition that their lives were intertwined in a way neither had expected. There was a softness in his gaze, a quiet affection that needed no words. As the stars began to appear, Emma and Jack walked back to the cabin. The fire was crackling, casting a warm glow across the walls. They prepared a simple dinner together, laughing softly at small mistakes and sharing stories of their pasts, carefully avoiding the pains but celebrating the small joys. After dinner, they sat by the fire, sipping tea. Jack leaned back, looking at the flames. "I never thought I could feel this happy again," he admitted. "I thought solitude was all I'd ever know." Emma reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Solitude has its place," she said softly, "but connection, that's what makes life rich. And it's never too late to let it in." Jack squeezed her hand gently, a gesture of trust and gratitude. "I think I'm ready to try," he said. "With you." Emma's eyes softened. "I'm here, every step of the way." For the rest of the evening, they talked quietly, sharing dreams and small hopes for the future. The cabin, once a place of loneliness and quiet longing, was now alive with laughter, warmth, and love. Every corner, every room, every space had been touched by their efforts, both physically and emotionally. Before going to bed, Emma and Jack stepped outside one last time. The night sky was clear, filled with stars that seemed to stretch forever. They stood together in silence, feeling the cool mountain air on their faces, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and earth. Jack spoke softly, almost to himself. "I didn't know I could feel like this again. I didn't know life could feel this full." Emma smiled and leaned her head slightly toward him. "It can. And it will. As long as we share it." They returned inside, the cabin glowing softly in the light of the fire. Emma lay in bed, thinking about how far they had come, from strangers in a quiet cabin to two people building trust, care, and perhaps love. She realized that this journey had changed them both, giving them hope, warmth, and a sense of belonging that they had long been missing. Jack, sitting quietly by the window, looked out at the mountains. His heart felt lighter than it had in years. The solitude that had once felt safe now seemed unnecessary, replaced by a connection that brought joy, hope, and comfort. He knew that the cabin and his life would never be the same again. And as the night deepened, two lives, once shaped by loneliness and quiet isolation, now intertwined, ready to face the future together. They had found more than companionship. They had found understanding, trust, and the beginnings of a love that promised to grow with each passing day. In the quiet mountains, under a blanket of stars, the cabin was no longer just a house. It was a home. And for Emma and Jack, it was the start of a new chapter, one filled with hope, laughter, and the quiet joy of shared life.